Let's look at this particular question called sweet cicely. Right, it was tested in December 2017. Right, and then what else? Mhm. So we need to advise sweet cicely why decisions such as what size of chocolate factory to build must include consideration of risks and uncertainty, and then evaluate the use of pest analysis in managing those risks and uncertainty. Okay, so that's always what they provide. So how using pest analysis will help us manage this risks and uncertainty surrounding the project. Right, and number B, we need to explain which of the three options of the new chocolate factory would be preferred by the board, the new shareholders, according to their risk appetite. So for two different stakeholders. Right, using the appendix data in 2, which of the three options of the new chocolate factory are risk neutral would choose. Okay, so in the first one we just need probably just without the expected value, right? And then for a risk neutral it will be using expected value and explain any problems with this approach used to make the choice. Right, of course, the expected value has its own disadvantages, such as what? Such as it is not suitable uh, for one of projects, right? So it has to be repeated again and again, so it's not suitable for that. Right, that's one of the biggest one. And then the probable outcomes might not be the ones that we expected, and probability is also subjected to a lot of subjectivity. Right, okay, let's see the background. So first of all we need to analyze that how pest analysis can help manage the uncertainty and what size of factory to build. Right, okay, so sweet cicely, what do? They manufacture sweets and confectionery. Right, so sweets and confectionery, it's kind of FMCG kind of company. Right, can't say FMCG, I guess it's not that, but whatever it is, sweet lifespan maybe, sweets lifespan may be shorter. I don't think for confectionery there will be that much of a short lifespan, but still it depends on the product, depends on the sweet, right? But what has happened is it has delivered stable, modest increases to the shareholders' wealth. So stable shareholders' wealth, right? So people might want that, right? Some shareholders, we could talk about that as well. And following the change in ownership, the new shareholders are keen to increase the long-term performance of business and are prepared to accept high level of risks. Right, so the question does not clearly mention whether it's a complete change in ownership or what else. Right, okay, so new factory, that could give us some analysis related points, related marks. New chocolate factory is basically they are planning to set up factory to manufacture chocolate bars, and then there could be three options for the size and output capacity, and SC must choose size which is more suited to the expected demand. So to the expected demand, okay, so to the expected demand, so that's the decision that they need to make. And what's the first requirement is what size of factory, right? And what's the second requirement among the three options which will be preferred? Okay, that's more of a other thing that we need to consider. So the first part, we will be inferring a lot from this scenario. So external factors as well as the impact of quality, branding and pricing. So demand for SC will be influenced by external factors such as consumers' taste for chocolate over other sweets, and even suggested health benefits of certain types of chocolate. There could be some suggested health benefits, right, for different types of chocolate. And a high cost ingredient in the chocolate bar is cocoa. High cost ingredient is cocoa, right, which is traded on international market, and market price of cocoa fluctuates with world demand. So fluctuates with world demand, right? So due to economic growth, the chocolate consumption is rising in many countries where it is considered once a luxury. In certain countries, however, governments are introducing additional taxes on products containing sugar, right? So it's sugar tax. Right. And confectionery products being derived from an agricultural crop, the availability and pricing is basically influenced by climate conditions, soil erosion and diseases, right? So political conflicts. This thing will political conflicts and political instability in cocoa regions will restrict its availability. Recent technological advances in production of cocoa has made such as use of genetically modified crops which has higher yields, right, with cocoa plants in the near future. Promises, okay, it's not yet available, but it promises in the near future, right? So we might keep constant tab on that. Right. Another thing is you've been asked to help SC choose one of the three options for the new chocolate factory. The board member had told you that board is examining into cake manufacturing several years ago. With hindsight, our planning on the proposal was poor. We sold only slightly fewer cakes than expected, but had not realized how sensitive our operating profit would be to a smaller change in demand. The previous shareholders thought problems in the cake business would put their dividends at risk, and so stopped manufacturing. Okay, slightly fewer. So SC stopped manufacturing cakes. The board one does not want to repeat these mistakes, so we want to minimize the opportunity cost. Right, of making the wrong decision. Okay, so it's maximum regret or something like that, right? So they want to do that, right, for the new factory. So appendix 1 shows the NPV of three options discounted at cost of capital. Appendix 2 shows the expected operating profit generated by the three options in the first year of project according to the market price of the cocoa and assuming an annual demand of this much. Right, so first of all we need to advise. Okay, so first of all we need to, let's just break down the question. What size of factory to build must include consideration of risks and uncertainty, and then we can use use of pest analysis. Okay, let's just divide the questions into that. Right, and we could do like different factors as well. It's 14 marks, right? So of course we need to do that. So let's look at the size of chocolate factory. So risks relates to what? So you are comfortable with pest and then risks, and risks, then you should find this section manageable. This is a good example of pest may be how pest may be examined. Rather than simply listing various pest factors, you are expected to evaluate pest factors which lead to risks and uncertainty and how they can be managed effectively by SC. So clear workings, and then minimax regret, right? Minimax regret in terms of the directives, right? Maximax and then expected value. Okay, so importance of incorporating risks and uncertainty in long-term decisions. So risks in this situation is associated with what? A variability of demand, right, or variability of outcomes, and the probabilities which are known or can be estimated. Uncertainty where the outcomes and the probabilities are unknown, right? So risk relates to variability of outcomes where the probabilities are known, whereas in case of uncertainty, the outcomes and their probabilities are unknown. Okay, outcomes and their probabilities are unknown. The variability of demand for chocolate bars is a risk. So the variability of chocolate demand, right, is a risk, and the probabilities of different level of demands can be estimated. The outbreak of conflict in affecting all this area is a uncertainty. Very good point over here. They have even further broken down risks and uncertainty. So risks is what? It's relating to variability of outcomes and probabilities of which are known, okay, and can be predicted or can be estimated. So risks relate to variability of outcomes, right? Uncertainty relates to difficulty in knowing the probability and the outcomes, okay. And in this situation, the level of demand is what? Level of demand is the outcome, right? Is the outcome, and it is a risk. It is a risk, and then the probabilities of different level of demands can be estimated. Okay, so you see, understand the probabilities. So given the probability can be estimated and we know there will be variable in the variations in the outcome, it's a risk. And then when there is the cocoa prices, all these factors affecting it, it's an uncertainty. And then the market price of cocoa and demand of bars are exogenous variable which significantly affect the performance of SC. So exogenous variable does not. So market price and demand for chocolate bars, right? So these are outside the control, but over which business has no control. And climate conditions, soil erosion all affect the price of cocoa, therefore performance of SC, right? So when investors evaluate business, they take into account prospective returns and the level of risks associated. Many managers should consider risks and return when evaluating projects on their behalf. Long-term strategic planning requires forecasts to be made about future events such as price of cocoa. These events are by definition unknown and subject to risks and uncertainty. Risks and uncertainty must therefore be considered when making long-term plans, such as establishing a new factory, right? So the further into the plans, the riskier, the more uncertain, right? So events are unlikely to be, as it's harder to predict what conditions will be, right? So you can't predict next earthquake or anything else. So this means that the consideration of risks and uncertainty is even more important when long-term decisions rather than short-term, right? So use of PEST, right? So incorporate risks and uncertainty into long-term strategic planning. SC can identify and monitor important exogenous variables, taking action to manage risks they present, okay, such as a traded commodity. We can see if the prices are rising, we could have hedged it, right? So by using cocoa futures. So the board management comment suggests that planning for a cake business was poor and did not adequately consider the exogenous variable. So it was basically about what? About the exogenous variable, right? So risks in the macro environment can be identified using pest analysis, right? So for political factors, the market price of cocoa is affected by conflicts and political uncertainty, right? So the consideration of this external factors is needed to incorporate risks and uncertainty into long-term planning, right? So based on that, we could have excess inventory or not, right? So by identifying factors such as political instability, SC can improve its long-term performance by sourcing cocoa from more political stable region, right? So just making that assessment will help us decide where to source our products from so that it's likely to be unaffected. The political situation in a region can change rapidly, so which make it difficult to incorporate these risks in long-term planning as there is high degree of uncertainty. The introduction of increased taxes on product containing sugar is a political factor, right? So it's a political factor, and once introduced, the factor is likely to operate in the long term and can be more predictable. So SC could develop products which are less sugary and so reduce the amount of this additional taxes, right? Economic factors is basically the variation in long-term interest rates, right? So which can influence what? Which can influence the performance, SC performance by affecting the exchange rates or overall consumer demand, right? So by identifying these factors, what happens? SC can hedge against this currency risks, currency exchange rates, and in the long term, SC could locate its operation in a country where the risks of exchange rate fluctuations are lower, right? You see, there is a very good analysis marks that can be gained over here is when there is a changes in long-term interest rate that will influence the exchange rate, which will in turn affect SC's performance. Okay, so by identifying this, what can be done? We can have hedge against currency exchange rates, right? And for social factors, what can be done? For social factors, the overall demand for chocolate products will be influenced by social factors as well, such as consumers' taste, increased awareness, right, of healthy eating. So SC can improve its long-term performance by not investing in a factory at all if it believes demand for its product will fail sufficiently to make the venture unprofitable, right? The increased cocoa yields from genetically modified, so technological factor, right? So the genetically modified thing is there, so could incorporate this into NPV for the factory, right? So there may be unpredictable consequences which are harder to plan, such as acceptance by consumers of GMO, genetically modified foods. For number B, we can estimate the demand, right? So the board wants to minimize opportunity cost of making wrong decision, right? So they want minimax regret, right? Would be appropriate method to use for that. So they would choose the project with the lowest maximum regret. So for that, what can we do? We can create a regret table. So regret table is nothing else but we select the maximum and then subtract it. Okay, so the maximum regret in option A for annual demand is what? At 50 million is how much? Is 4, right? And then we subtract it. So 4 minus 4 is 0, minus 8 minus 4 is that much, and we get 36, right? For 60, same thing again. What's the maximum regret in this situation? Maximum regret is, so the maximum amount you will lose over here is, you'll miss out is 16 million, right? So 16, so 6 minus 16, and then 16 minus 6, 16, and then 24 minus 16 will be minus 40, right? So for 70 million as well, we just compute that. So among that, we will choose the minimum one. Okay, so among that, so we will choose the, so first of all, we for every demand option, we select the lowest regret or the highest regret, and then we subtract it for across every demand level, and then we categorize or select the maximum ones, right? And among that, we choose the maximum regret, right? So the maximum, or oh no, we choose the lowest one. Okay, min max, right? We choose the maximum first of all, and then among that we choose minimum, which is 11 million. Okay, so we choose that 11 million regret, so that will be our lowest maximum regret. And the drawback of using this is that the probabilities of outcomes are not considered. Okay, so probability of anything occurring is not being considered when you're just using maximum max or minimax or min max regret, right? The keyword over here is minimize the opportunity cost. Okay, that's it. So that's what we are doing exactly, right? So the opportunity cost over here is 4 million, right? And in this case it's 16, in this case it's 16. Okay, no, in this case it's 17 maximum. And for new shareholders, they want what? So we need to consider for them as well, right? So what were they saying? That the new shareholders are willing to accept high level of risks, right? So they are more likely, so they are keen to increase long-term performance of business, and they want a maximum possible NPV, right? So they want the maximum possible NPV, so maximax, right? So for each demand level, the maximum is 4, and it's 16 and then 17, so they will go with the 17 one, right? So 17 million at annual demand of 70 million. So that's a maximax rule, and then this is very optimistic. It ignores the fact that risk seekers have a risk return trade-off. Okay, so it does not take into account of probabilities, and it ignores the risk return trade-off. All right, for expected values, it is for every option we use the expected value of it. So for number 3, for option A, right, so market price is that much. So for expected value for risk neutral, right? So 3 is our what? Expected value. So profit generated by 3 options in the first year. Okay, so 3 is the profit, and then the probability is 0.3. So 3 into 0.3 plus 0.5 into 0.4, right? And then that, so 3 is gone over there. For option A, right? For option A, these are the 3 possible outcomes, right? So that is what 0.3 into 3.3 plus 0.4 into 0.5, right? And 0.3 into 0. Or minus 2, you could say, right? That will give us a value of 0.5. Again, in the second one, it will give us a value of 2. In the third one, it will give us a value of 2.1. Right, so they will choose the maximum among this, so it will choose who the risk neutral shareholders will choose, or investor will choose 2.1 billion, which would be option 3, right? And we need to talk about the problems associated with this approach. Is basically it's not always the same, okay? So it's only appropriate for decisions which is repeated many times, okay? So risk neutral would use expected value approach, and this does not appear to be the case, okay? So as this is a strategic decision, right? So a strategic expansion decision, so it's a one-off event, right? So so it's only appropriate for repeated decisions, right? So repeated many times. So this could last for several years, and the expected value will not equal the actual outcome, okay? And we can talk about probability, which is what the market price is subjective, right? So for example, market price is also subjective, which is affected by very high things, right? So very different external variables, and historical market price is not necessarily a guide what will happen to the future. And expected value is suitable for risk neutral investor, the risk neutral investor, which in this case the stakeholders are SC, hence does not apply to stakeholder at SC, right? So hence the approach is inappropriate in the decision on the 3 options. Determining the payoff is also difficult when the demand is subject to uncertainty. So SC should not make a decision on the factory based only on first year's operating profit, should take a long-term view based on the discounted cash flows, right? So it should not only be based on 1 year. Okay, so that is one thing. And then what is that? Calculation of expected value is 1 marks, and conclusion and drawback is 1 mark per point, okay? So calculation is very less over there, just 1 marks only. So calculation and comment on board performance, 4 marks. Comment on new shareholders is 2 marks, okay? So that's a good amount of distribution over there. Just calculation is only 2 marks, right? Preference and all, it's a bit of a marks, right? So for risks and uncertainty, it's 1 marks per point, consideration of risks and uncertainty, and then up to 8 marks for that. So even if 8 marks is guaranteed over there, 2, 4, 6 marks has to be given from pest analysis, okay? So we need to use that, both of them. Alright, so answer planning in this thing, it's very critical. In this question, it's going to be very critical. It's very critical, right? Answer planning, it's going to be very critical. Answer planning is very critical. So that's pretty much it for this video. Take care, bye bye.